Hello YouTube. Today I want to tell you the story of two guitars, and we're going to have a bit of a battle between them, and I'm going to decide which one I'm going to keep. So I was looking for, a few days ago, a couple weeks ago now I guess, I was looking for a cheap guitar, a cheap acoustic guitar that I would feel comfortable taking out hiking, taking out to hang out with friends, taking out to the Greenbelt or the river or wherever I'm hanging out, and I don't want to worry about my expensive Gibson J45. So I wanted something cheap, and but I still wanted something good. I mean, you know, it's not really fun to play a piece of crap guitar. So I wanted something decent. So I kind of narrowed it down to some brands that I like, and then just started checking Craigslist for used ones at a decent price. And historically, when I've gone to music stores to try out low-end guitars, entry-level guitars with friends, if I'm going to help them, you know, pick a first guitar or something like that, I almost always ended up walking out of there with a Yamaha, or my friend always ended up walking out of there with a Yamaha, just because they're consistently really good in the low end. They've got a great set of entry-level guitars across, you know, electric and acoustic. But Fender in recent years has also gotten really good in the low end. They've got a great lineup of entry-level guitars. Their quality has gotten super good in the low end, and by quality I just mean, you know, a consistent build quality. Obviously they're still using very low end components when you're talking about a guitar that costs $150, $250, but nonetheless you can still get a well-made guitar that's going to perform well for not a lot of money. And I knew when I started looking that Fender and Yamaha were near the top of the list for that. And it just so happens that the first thing I found was Yamaha. I found this Yamaha FG-700S. And this I knew to be a very popular model. I've helped people pick this one out when we've gone into Guitar Center or the local music store. And it is about a $200 guitar new. They don't make this exact model anymore. They just discontinued it relatively recently and upgraded it to the FG-800 model, which is pretty much identical. They changed sound hole design a little bit. I think maybe they changed some of the components a little bit, but basically it's the same kind of guitar. And I'll talk a little more about the construction of these guys in a minute. But I want to continue my story. So after I bought the Yamaha and brought it home and liked it a lot. It's a good little guitar, plays really well, feels really good, sounds great. I try not to play it immediately after playing the Gibson J45 because it's not fair to compare a $2,000 guitar to a $200 guitar. But yeah, so that's the story of how I ended up with that. And now you're wondering, well, if you were happy with the Yamaha, why is there a Fender sitting next to it? And it's because I happen to keep looking at Craigslist, because I'm also shopping for a bass for a friend of mine, and I happened to see this, and I loved the finish on this. I also noticed that it was pretty much the exact, like, the comparative model. It's the competitive model up against that Yamaha. They cost the same when you buy them new. They are both $200 guitars. They are extremely popular models. The model of this is the CD-60 in the sunburst finish. And so I would wager that this and that are probably the most popular models of these acoustic guitars for both of these brands. I would think that, if I had to guess, maybe there's something cheaper, maybe there's a $150 model or whatever that outsells these, but these are certainly widely regarded as really good value. I went and did a little Google searching just to see what what these models were about, and they consistently come out at the top of the reviews in terms of people looking for entry-level acoustic guitars. So since I really liked the finish, and since the price was right, and since it came with a hard shell Fender case, I went ahead and wrote to the guy, and I went and picked it up. I was on my way. I was going to be driving right past where he lives, so it turned out good. And so I ended up with both of these guitars. And I thought it would be fun to talk about them with you guys. And also I thought it would be fun for me just to play them both. Not in a music store, because I've played very similar models to these many times over the years. Sorry about that, I had to turn off my amp, I noticed it was buzzing. And so I've played both of these models, or very similar models to this, over the years. And so I kind of knew what I was getting into. But mostly in music stores or at friends' houses or whatever. I wanted to bring it into the studio and actually hear them, actually, spend some time with them, measure the action on these guys, see how they hold tune over time, just all the things that, you kind of makes you decide, okay, well, this is a good guitar that I'm going to be really comfortable with over time. And so now I've had a couple of weeks to play with both of these guitars. And I like them both. There are some caveats I want to talk about in a little bit. After I demo both of these guitars, I'll give you an A/B test. I'm going to do a blind A/B test so that you can actually just hear it, and then you can decide which one you like the sound of best, and then at the end you can see which one it was and which one you liked, and then you'll know, if you're a Fender or a Yamaha entry-level guitar kind of guy. But let's talk about what these guitars are. So these are your basic dreadnought guitars. Same exact body shape on these things, almost the same measurements all across the board. There are slight differences. The bridge and the nut shape are a little different on each of these things. The string width is a little different, even though the neck width is, I think, identical. They feel a little different when playing. The necks feel a little different, but not significantly. They are both Sitka spruce, or at least, I'm not sure if this one is Sitka spruce, but they're both spruce tops. They are both rosewood fretboards. Those are the most, those affect the sound the most of a guitar. You've got the soundboard that makes a big difference in the sound of an acoustic guitar, and then you've got the fretboard that makes a big difference in the sound of a guitar. With the soundboard making the biggest difference, I think. That's my understanding. The body, back, and sides also impacts tone a little bit less. And that's where we see, I think, the first real big difference between these two. And it's not even that big of a difference. The Fender has a mahogany back and sides, and I think it is just two pieces. I do not think they've glued up multiple pieces. It might even be one piece. If it's one piece, I would be surprised if it's not a veneer. Yeah, so there's a seam inside here, but I don't see a seam on the back. Oh yeah, I do. Okay, so yeah, I think there's just two pieces on the back, or maybe they've hidden the seams better than on the other guitar. But anyway, so mahogany back and sides. I believe the neck is also mahogany, and then obviously rosewood fretboard, as I said. But the difference between these two is that this is the first model, I think, from Yamaha that uses NATO or NATO, I don't know how it's pronounced. It is sometimes referred to as Eastern mahogany or Asian mahogany, even though the trees aren't really closely related. But it does have, as you can see, it's sort of a reddish color. It's a little lighter than the mahogany on that. But it does have that long, dense grain that the mahogany has. So I think they're pretty similar woods in terms of being tone woods. The consensus in the industry seems to be that this is a pretty good substitute for mahogany. And when I compare the two, I do think it does sound, they do sound very similar. There are differences, and you'll be able to hear them in a minute. when we do the comparisons. But I think previous models of the FG, this sort of, whatever the $200 Dreadnought from Yamaha was, I think they were using mahogany in the past, and I think this is maybe the first model where they switched, because I went and looked at the specs, and it looks like, historically speaking, they used to be mahogany, and now they are this NATO wood. But I don't think that's the negative. In this case, though, they do have, I'm pretty sure this is a 4-piece back. The seams are pretty hard to see, but it does look like it's glued up. That's kind of just, you know, pretty common in low-cost guitars, because getting a whole big chunk of wood to slice out, you know, your back from, if it's not just a veneer, because you can do a veneer and put it on, you know, thicker wood, which they do on electric guitars a lot, like solid body guitars. They can take veneers and make it look really nice and do book matched veneer pieces, even though the body itself might be a bunch of glued together, you know, glued up pieces. And that's fine. It doesn't make a huge difference in tone, but it does make a difference in the price. And just, I mean, it's just more expensive to find and source big, huge chunks of wood that you can cut the whole thing out of. Likewise, the neck on both of these is built from at least 2 pieces of wood, probably 3. I mean, there's a seam here where it's been glued up, and there's a seam up here where it's been glued up, and that's true of both of these. Both of these guitars have a multi-piece glued up neck. Again, not a problem. It's not a negative thing, I don't think. I doubt you can hear the difference, but in more expensive guitars, they might saw it out of a single big piece. It's just more expensive to obtain a big, giant single piece like that. Okay, so that's the construction on these things. They are virtually identical guitars, with the exceptions I noted. A couple of other minor exceptions. The Yamaha has a real nice mother of pearl inlay of their logo, and this little curlicue thing, whatever that is, little flower or something. And the Fender is just painted on underneath the finish, so it's a little less classy, I guess. But given that the wood on this seems to be fancier, I think it's kind of a toss-up which one is the fancier of the two. I happen to really love the sunburst finish, but the Yamaha comes in a sunburst finish. That's just not what I found on Craigslist when I was searching, so, you know, it's kind of a toss-up. But a really important and useful thing to know about these guitars is that they're super widely available in the used market. Because they're such big sellers, in any major city in the country, I think you can go online and find at least one of these guitars available in your market at a decent price. And a decent price is about half, you know, 100, 120 bucks. You might have to pay a little more if you live in a small town and there's not a lot to choose from, but I live just outside of Austin, and when I look, I see many of these guitars. I can find, even just before I started making the video, I went to look and see what the options were, and there were 3 or 4 of these guitars. Probably not in as good a shape as these, so you might have to wait around a little while to find one that's in really good shape. Both of these, pretty much identical story behind them as well. When I bought them, the guys who had them, 2 different guys, obviously, across, you know, a week or whatever difference in when I met them, but in both cases they bought them, took a couple of lessons, got frustrated, gave up, stuck it in a closet in the case, never really touched them again. So they've both barely been used at all. I did ask them about whether they had been professionally set up when they bought them, and neither of them had been set up professionally, so that's a useful piece of knowledge when we start talking about the differences I found and the things that I felt would maybe make one of these guitars a better choice for a beginner. Even if everything else is identical about them, or very similar. So they've never been set up. I did a little work on one of them after I got them because it was troublesome. Both of them got them at Guitar Center. I think that's what they said. And so I have a pretty strong level of confidence that neither of these guitars have seen a professional setup. Because Guitar Center, I mean, you know, they're good for what they are, But when it comes to cheap guitars, they get them in the box, they unbox them, they shovel them out onto the showroom floor, they rack them up, sell them, and shovel in some more. They don't really, they're not doing setups on $200 guitars. That's just not, that's not part of their, you know, that wouldn't fit in their profit margins to spend $20 or $30 worth of labor on every $200 guitar that comes in. So I think it is safe to say that both of these guitars are exactly as they came from the factory. One is a little older than the other. The Fender is a few years old. This one was only a few months old when I bought it. But I think the major bump in quality for Fender came many years ago, about a decade ago, I think. Is when at least when I started noticing that low-end Fenders had gotten really, really good. And on par with some of the other brands that have been making really good quality low-end guitars, like Ibanez and Yamaha. And there are others, obviously. But mostly I want to focus on these two. Let me check my notes, make sure I'm not missing anything. Alright, yeah, so we're going to pause for a play test, and we will... I will play them both with a variety of different kinds of sounds, or different playing styles. I'll play a little, you know, individual notes picking, I'll strum some chords, play something, a little jazzy number or something, and some fingerstyle something, and we'll see which ones we like, and I'll let you know at the end what I've decided to do in terms of keeping it. And I'm also going to let you know the problems that I think one of these brands still needs to overcome. I'll also show you some close-up pictures of these guitars so you can see what the finish looks like, what the fit, you know, how well all these things are put together. Honestly though, they're both fantastically constructed. Again, the quality of low-end guitars has gotten so good in recent years that it's really hard. It's almost hard to even justify, you know, spending, you know, $1,000, $2,000 for a really high-end guitar, even though there is a difference. And certainly, USA-made guitars are beautiful works of art in a lot of cases, and I own several US-made guitars, and I love them. I am not suggesting you not buy a US-made guitar if you have the financial wherewithal to do so. But man, cheap guitars have gotten good. So yeah, let's do the play test, and then we'll come back, and I'll give you a little summary of what I think of these guitars. Okay, we're back from the playtest. So everybody's heard both instruments in a variety of styles. And let me know down below which one you thought was, before you continue, make your guess down below about which one you thought was which, if you want to make a guess. If not, I will reveal that guitar A was the Fender and guitar B was the Yamaha. And my thoughts on that, I felt like the Fender was a bit more live sounding. There's a lot more going on, I guess I would say. But I felt like the Yamaha had a lot more, I keep using the word a lot. The difference between these two guitars, it can never be defined as a lot. But I did feel like this had more definition, more clarity. Certainly in the low end, I really liked how clearly I could discern each of the strings on big strums. This was a very reserved instrument, and I don't want to use that word in a negative light. I think it was reserved in a way that was, maybe I should say controlled or controllable. Felt like this one was getting away from me every now and then when I got to strumming. And those big loud chords. And the louder I got, the more this one really came alive without losing, without sort of losing its definition. So I think if I really had to pick the best sounding of the two, I would probably end up with the Yamaha. It's very, very close though. And this one is also a lot of fun to play. It also sounds really good. And sometimes you want that live sound. Sometimes you want that real, you know, maybe rock and roll-y kind of, a little bit of a loose cannon kind of sound. It sounds like it's maybe just on the verge of getting out of control. This one never really sounds that way. This does not sound like it's out of control. I really felt like this was playing exactly what I wanted to play. And any sloppiness you hear is just me playing sloppy. Whereas this one, I almost feel like I can blame it a little bit for sounding a little sloppy sometimes, because sometimes it sounds a little rough in the low end. It's a little darker, and maybe that can be attributed to the mahogany versus the natto, or the natto, or however the heck you pronounce that. But yeah, still, nonetheless, I think either guitar, I would be happy with either guitar. And I may even end up keeping the Fender instead of the Yamaha, just because I like that finish so much more. Or I might start looking for the Yamaha in a sunburst finish and see how that works out. But before I close this video out, I do want to talk about one more thing that matters, I think, a lot to a beginner, and that might determine which of these two guitars you pick up. Even if you like the sound, you know, of one specifically, there's one factor that I think is really important, and that's how playable the guitar is when you pick it up. I mentioned that neither of these guitars had seen a professional setup when I bought them, specifically because one of them had very bad setup when I got it. Or at least, I don't want to say it had bad setup, but the action was really high. I would even say unplayably high. Certainly for beginners, it would have been really hard to play, and that problem instrument was the Fender. When I picked it up, the action was really bad. And so, first thing I did when I got it home was I touched up the truss rod to straighten the neck a little bit, which is understandable. I'm in a very humid, hot climate. It gets hot and cold. We have very extreme weather here in the Austin area, in the Central Texas area, so it's understandable that the neck might have bowed up a little bit over, you know, the few years that the guy owned it. But touching up the neck didn't do the trick. The bridge was also really just way too high. It had never been touched. It had never been sanded down and set so that the action was good. So that's a problem. We're talking about an entry-level guitar, a guitar that somebody's spending about $200 on if they're going into a music store, or about $100, $120 if they're buying it used. In either case, if it's not going to get a professional setup, it may not be a good learning instrument. It may be too hard to play for a beginner. And I worry that I kind of feel bad for the guy that had this guitar, because when I bought it, he told me that he'd heard from a bunch of people technical questions like, how high is the action? And as soon as I picked up the guitar, I was like, the action is not good at all. But I knew I could fix it. So that didn't bother me. I just, I assumed that as long as the neck's pretty close to straight, and that it didn't look like it had been abused, and that the truss rod didn't look like it had been, forced or anything at any point in its life, I figured I could fix it. But so if you're wanting a cheap guitar, you don't want to immediately turn around and spend another 30, 40, 50 bucks to get a professional setup on it. And as I mentioned, most music stores are not doing a professional setup on this. They're not even looking at it. They're just sticking it on the shelf. And you're lucky if they tune it up, at a place like Guitar Center or wherever. So how it comes out of the box for an entry-level guitar really matters. And it's the most likely to not get the attention it needs at your guitar store. So if you're a beginner, and this is also a useful time to mention that a lot of the times when I've helped a friend pick a guitar and we've walked out of the store with a Yamaha, it was because they were the ones that were the best set up right off the rack. And I knew I wouldn't have to work on it. I knew my friend wouldn't have to pay, somebody, $50 or $100 or whatever they want to charge. Really, just for lowering a bridge and touching up the truss rod, it shouldn't cost more than $20 or $30, because it's only a few minutes of a luthier's time. But if you get it done at the Guitar Center or wherever, they're going to charge you a lot. And so you don't really want to turn a $200 guitar into a $240 guitar before you even walk out the door, or a $250 guitar. That makes a cheap guitar not as cheap. You start getting up into nicer guitars. You start getting, your options start opening up by the time you get to $250 and $300 and so on and so forth. So that was frustrating that the quality of Fender products in the low end has gotten so good in recent years, and yet the setup was still pretty poor. And so the user experience for somebody going and buying a Fender low-end guitar and then finding that it, and wanting to learn on it, because a beginner may not know. They may not know enough to know that, good Lord, I'm really having to press really hard, because it's always hard. But you don't want to make it twice as hard to play your guitar. So there's the thing. The Yamaha was beautifully set up right out of the box. And that's been my experience many times over the years. Again, I'm probably going to keep the Fender instead of the Yamaha, even though I kind of like the sound of this one better, and I feel like it plays maybe a little bit better. But overall, though, if you were to take away the hearing part of this test, and if you were to hand me these guitars as they are now, now that this one has been set up and the action lowered and the truss rod straightened and everything gotten into a good playable state, if you handed me both these guitars but didn't let me listen to them, I would probably think the Fender is a more expensive guitar, because it is mahogany back and sides, mahogany neck. Looks like it's fewer pieces of wood making up the back and the sides than this. Just feels like a slightly more expensive instrument, even though they're both $200 instruments. So quality-wise, Fender might edge out the Yamaha just by a touch. But build quality, they're both fantastic, except for that setup problem. So there you go. Let me know in the comments which one you like the sound of the best. Let me know what your favorite cheap acoustic guitars are. Maybe I'll pick up one of those too and try them out. I'm kind of having some fun buying and selling guitars now that I've got a little studio here. And so I can try them all out, and I can try out all the guitars all the weird guitars and that kind of thing that I like, that I've liked over the years, but haven't had room for because I live in an RV, and so I don't have a lot of room for random crap. So I had scaled back to just 3 guitars: a bass, my Schecter electric guitar, and my Gibson J45. So I'm having fun buying random crap and playing with it, and then, you know, selling it for about what I paid for it. Just getting a chance to get hands-on with this stuff and seeing what it inspires, if it inspires some music making. So let me know what you think, what your favorite cheap guitars are. Maybe I'll pick one up and try it out.